Cliff, don't do this. That document's the only proof we have.
No, we don't need this. I changed the TV license. Everyone's going paperless now.
Oh, OK. Great.
Managing your TV licence needn't be a drama.
Sorry about that.
Go paperless at tvlicensing.co.uk.
This is BBC One. At 6, it's the news now with Clive Myrie.
Today at 6, we have a special report from the front line of Ukraine's counterattack against Russia. We're with one battle-hardened brigade pushing east into Russian-held territory.
They're making small gains. The big challenge for them is when they find a major breakthrough, and they haven't found that yet. And that could come anywhere along this 1,000-kilometre front line.
Also on the programme, a search has begun for an underwater vessel that's gone missing while taking people to view the wreck of the Titanic beneath the Atlantic. Jingle and mingle, the message on a Christmas party invite for Tory party activists during one lockdown, seen by the BBC. More mortgage madness for homeowners. A typical 2-year fixed deal now has an interest rate of 6%.
Good shot.
And England set Australia 281 to win as the first test heads for a thrilling finish.
And on BBC London, families of the victims of the Croydon tram crash say the systems let them down after the speeding driver is cleared of being responsible for the derailment.
Hello there. We begin this evening with an eyewitness report from the front line of the war in Ukraine. It's at least 2 weeks since Ukrainian troops began a concerted effort to push back Russian defensive lines in the south and east of the country. An Operation Kiev hopes might eventually see the liberation of large swathes of territory. But the front line is long, some 600 miles, roughly 1,000 kilometers, and Russian forces are well dug in, having had months to prepare for the Ukrainian attack. Well, our correspondent Quentin Somerville and camera journalist Darren Conway joined Ukraine's 68th Jaeger Brigade as its combat forces fanned out eastwards, having recently regained the village of Bladodatny in the southeast of the country. Their report is unflinching. On occasion here at the BBC, we felt it necessary, since Russia's invasion, to bring you images that may be distressing to some viewers, to emphasise the horror of this war.
The struggle to take back what's theirs has begun in earnest. This was Russian-held ground 2 weeks ago. For Three Storm Brigade, the journey to the front takes longer now. Here in the east and in the south, there's still a long way to go. Ukraine is on the offensive. Russia fought hard to keep this ground, but Three Storm fought harder.
Yeah. Step by step, because mines may be Russian mines. So, let's go.
This is all Russian equipment and uniforms here?
Yeah. Eat, equipment.
Rations, everything. The guns are louder now. After months of conserving artillery, it's Ukrainian weapons that ring out. That's small arms fire. That's Ukrainian. Outgoing. You can hear a lot of artillery here as well. Also outgoing much more than before. A Russian shell lands nearby. Across these positions, Russian corpses lie uncollected. So they retook these trenches fairly recently. Actually a number of Russian dead, at least 2 still in there. And they're taking ground to the south of Bakhmut and to the north of Bakhmut. The city itself still firmly under Russian control. But it's very early days in this counter-offensive. They're making small gains. The big challenge for them is when they find a major breakthrough, and they haven't found that yet. And that could come anywhere along this 1,000 kilometre front line. It could come here, it could come in the south, and they're attacking on multiple places, just trying to stretch those Russian resources, manpower and weaponry, to breaking point, and then they can smash on through. We travelled 130 kilometres southwest from Three Storms position to a second area of Ukrainian attack, where the 68th Brigade have captured a pocket of territory, and on to the east of the village of Blahodatny. Here, Company Commander Andrei Onistrat is giving the orders.
Diesel, it's very important. You need to listen to people. Listen closely and do everything they tell you. And smile. Why are you so serious? We are winning this war.
But winning comes at a price. The men fought Russian Marines for 3 days to take this village. There were many casualties.
Here is very difficult, because this is main area of activity for Russian soldiers.
And we can see here, it looks like it's been fighting house to house, room by room, very close.
Yeah, this is very difficult. Every kilometers is very difficult.
And everywhere we walk.
I know how many people we lose, but I cannot tell you.
Okay. There's more Russian corpses over here.
Russian soldiers. 1, 2, 3.
Despite the pain involved in capturing this village, the men won't linger here. They're already packing up and readying for the next offensive. This specialised drone unit has a key role in the next imminent attack. While artillery sounds all around them, they have to move fast to get closer still to Russian positions. The cost of this fight is everywhere to see. Destroyed Western-built armour litters the battlefield. But Russia too has lost dozens of tanks and vehicles since this offensive began. On a hot day east of Blahodatny, the Ukrainian attack begins. The air thickens with artillery and expectation. Ukrainian guns pound the Russian positions, and their enemy soon responds. But it's a miss. Myrie of the drone unit can't delay until the shelling stops. The drones he's sending to enemy trenches carry grenades and smoke bombs. They lose as many as 5 of these a day. And there's more than just artillery to contend with.
The Russian helicopters and Russian jets fire every days, every time. Go to shelter.
Okay.
Oh, good luck.
I just illustrated that point very well, that one of the big advantages that the Russians have over the Ukrainians is air power. The Ukrainians are attacking on the ground, but the Russians still have helicopters, still have warplanes. It makes it much more difficult for them to advance. The battle won, the danger is far from over. As we make our way back from the trenches, more Russian artillery fire targets Andrei's convoy. We need to move fast. And the 49-year-old commander carries an extra burden, the memory of his son.
This helmet of my son, a little bit smaller for me, but this is like remember. This like remember.
This was 21-year-old Ostap, filmed the day before his death. He fought on the same front lines as his father. 2 days before the counter-offensive began, he was killed by a Russian drone.
It's cost a lot. It's been especially hard for you. You lost your son. Can you tell us a bit about your son, please?
Він хотів бути героєм для мене.
He wanted to be a hero for me.
І він хотів бути
He
героєм
wanted to
для
be a
мене.
hero for
Йому це
me,
вдалося.
and he succeeded.
Я хотів його оберігати,
I wanted to
а
protect
він
him,
хотів бути героєм. І
but
він
he
виграв.
wanted to be a hero. And he won.
Ukraine may yet win back its land, but there is much here that will never be recovered. Quentin Somerville, BBC News, Donetsk.
The very latest eyewitness report there from our team on the front line in Ukraine. A search and rescue mission is underway after an underwater vessel used to take people to view the wreck of the Titanic went missing in the Atlantic Ocean. It's not yet known how many people were on board. The wreck is around 370 miles off the coast of Newfoundland. Our North America correspondent Myrie Iqbal has the very latest.
This is OceanGate's submersible. A BBC team spent 8 days filming the crew prepare for last year's expedition.
We want everyone going into this fully informed. This is an experimental sub. This is a dangerous environment. It's 6,000 psi.
The Norwegian-made vessel can take up to 5 passengers, a pilot, a scientist and 3 tourists paying more than £195,000 each.
The crew were aware of the dangers. There were lots of safety procedures in place, and they made it clear to me when I was there that for an operation like this, if something goes wrong, it tends to be a recovery mission rather than a rescue mission.
Its mission is to dive 12,000 feet below the Atlantic Ocean to survey the wreck of the Titanic. The shipwreck is more than a century old and has been extensively explored since its remains were discovered in 1985. This is the 3rd time the expedition has done this voyage. The operating company, OceanGate Expeditions, says it's exploring all options to bring the crew on the submersible back to safety. It adds it's getting extensive assistance from several government agencies and deep-sea companies as it tries to regain contact. The vessel can carry up to 5 people, but we don't know yet how many were on board. Myrie Iqbal, BBC News, Washington.
Jingle and mingle. That's how Conservative activists were invited to enjoy a Christmas party held despite COVID restrictions in December 2020. Now, the BBC has seen one of the invitations after video emerged at the weekend showing people dancing at the event at Tory party headquarters. Police say they're now reviewing the video. Meanwhile, MPs have been debating the parliamentary report that found Boris Johnson deliberately misled the Commons about lockdown parties at Downing Street. Here's our political editor, Chris Mason.
Mingle. Jingle and mingle, reads the jaunty party invite. Yes, mingle, the very thing the COVID restrictions in London at the time banned.
As long as we don't scream that we're like...
And here is what that party at Conservative headquarters looked like. 30 people were invited. The save the date request appears to have been sent on behalf of Ben Mallet, or Ben Mallet OBE as he is now, having been honoured by Boris Johnson for political and public service. A spokesman for Mr Mallet said he didn't send the invitation himself. The party was for people working on Sean Bailey's campaign to be Mayor of London. Mr Johnson has awarded Mr Bailey a peerage, a lifelong seat in the House of Lords.
It obviously turned into something once I had left. I didn't realise that. But like I say, I'll say something to the BBC at a later date.
Jingling and mingling, sir. Like, how is that acceptable?
It isn't. I'm not saying it is for a second.
Are you embarrassed that you've been given a peerage despite the fact that you and your staff were so flagrantly partying?
Not me and my staff, which again, I apologise.
This is as close as we got to seeing Boris Johnson today in Oxfordshire as MPs in Westminster pass judgment on the final chapter in his political career, for now at least. Do they endorse the report which concluded he had lied to them in the Commons in moments like this?
There was no party and that no COVID rules were broken.
Today, the senior MP who chaired the committee that investigated Boris Johnson spoke in public for the first time since their report was published.
Because he was Prime Minister, Mr Johnson's dishonesty, if left unchecked, would have contaminated the whole of government, allowing misleading to become commonplace and thus erode the standards which are essential for the health of our democracy.
Penny Mordaunt, speaking for the government, acknowledged there was a lot in the report and recent debates that would anger people.
The lockdown breaches themselves, which grate hard with those who sacrifice so much to keep us all safe, or for others on wider issues such as the debasement of our honours system.
He lied to this House, to the people of this country, and when exposed, lashed out at the system designed to hold him and all of us here to account.
Very few have defended Boris Johnson, but this Tory backbencher did, saying he passed on in the Commons what he'd been told.
They advised him again and again that no rules were broken and that guidance was followed at all times.
Theresa May! But take a look at this. Boris Johnson's predecessor was unflinchingly critical.
I also say to members of my own party that it is doubly important for us to show that we are prepared to act when one of our own, however senior, is found wanting. I will vote in favour of the report of the Privileges Committee.
Why aren't you engaging in the Boris Johnson debate?
As for the Prime Minister, no sign of him in the Commons today. He was instead welcoming his Swedish opposite number to Downing Street. And Rishi Sunak's absence and his desire to say, frankly, as little as possible on all of this, really quite striking amid the cathartic anger that you can hear on the benches of the House of Commons this evening. A real sense from so many MPs that Boris Johnson's behaviour tainted all of them, and they're making that clear in so many of the contributions. The debate continues this evening. It is sure that the Commons will endorse the report of the Privileges Committee, and so the Parliament of Boris Johnson's former peers will condemn him directly.
Chris, thank you. Chris Mason there live at Westminster. A typical 2-year fixed-rate mortgage now has an interest rate of more than 6%. For the first time this year, mortgage lenders have been repricing their offers in recent weeks, driving up costs for homeowners seeking new deals. Now, it comes against a backdrop of high interest rates as the Bank of England battles inflation. Our economics editor Faisal Islam is here. That's the problem, isn't it? Stubbornly high inflation.
Yes, this big squeeze in the mortgage market continues day by day, with banks taking out their ranges of mortgage offers and replacing them with repriced mortgages at higher interest rates, as you say. And what's driving this is not actually individual Bank of England decisions to put up the interest rate, but instead the perception in the market that the bank will have to keep interest rates higher for a year or two in order to battle stubborn inflation. We can take a look at this most recent trend in the mortgage market, and you can see, as you say, the average typical 2-year fixed deal up at 6%. That's pretty high. It's actually lower than it was in the mini budget. The reason why we focus on this, it really matters. There was a big hump in terms of mortgage borrowing exactly 2 years ago during the pandemic stamp duty holiday. They're being repriced. You're talking hundreds of pounds a month in extra mortgage payments for those people facing repricing of their mortgages. Now, if we take a deeper dive into that, though, what's driving this? Perceptions in the marketplace. This is the government's borrowing rate over 2 years. That has gone up. That's reached 5% today, 5.1% just a few moments ago. That rate is higher than where it was at the time of the mini budget. So all eyes now on the Bank of England's decision on Thursday, not just how much it puts up interest rates on the day, but whether it can get the market's faith back as to where interest rates are going to go, inflation under control, because the government were pretty clear today that unlike the pandemic and the energy crisis, there won't be taxpayer support here. No. OK, Faisal, thank you. Faisal Islam. It is 18 minutes past 6, our top story this evening. We're on the front line of Ukraine's counterattack against Russia, with one battle-hardened brigade pushing east into Russian-held territory.
And England are chasing Australian wickets as the first Ashes test at Edgbaston looks set for an exciting finish.
Also coming up, private policing booms in London amid a rise in retail crime. Firms tell us why they're paying for protection. And after Boris Johnson steps down, Who could take his place as MP in Uxbridge?
Now, one of the most severe marine heat waves anywhere in the world has developed off the coast of Britain and Ireland. The European Space Agency says in some areas, water temperatures are as high as 3 to 4 degrees Celsius above the average for this time of year. Well, our climate editor, Justin Rowlatt, is here with more details. Justin.
Thanks, Clive. The exceptionally warm sea temperatures in the waters around the UK have been developing over the last few weeks. Just take a look at this. The darker colours in this graphic show how much warmer it is than the long-term average. And as you can see, the waters around the entire British Isles are warmer than usual. Look at this. The sea off the east coast from Durham all the way up to Aberdeen is significantly warmer, as is the water off the west coast of Ireland. Now, marine heat waves like this can kill sea life, sometimes on a massive scale, and are also associated with more intense storms. In fact, the entire North Atlantic is seeing exceptionally high temperatures. So why is that? Well, scientists say there are a number of factors. Changes in wind patterns may have allowed the surface of the ocean to build up more heat. Less dust has been blown into the atmosphere from the Sahara Desert. Now, dust particles reflect light and heat back into space. Another factor is thought to be changes to the rules for fuels for ships. They now produce less pollution, and particulate pollution like dust can have a cooling effect. But the big one in all of this is climate change. That underpins everything. As we continue to pump vast quantities of planet-warming CO2 into the atmosphere, global temperatures will continue to rise. And look at this. Sea temperatures globally are at record highs. The red line shows how much higher than the long-term average they are, and scientists do not expect things to let up this year. They're expecting more high temperatures in the coming months and are predicting next year, 2024, could well be the hottest ever recorded. Clive.
Okay, Justin, thank you. Justin Rowlatt there. The former Prime Minister David Cameron has denied his government's cuts to public spending during the austerity years undermined the UK's ability to prepare for a pandemic. He was speaking at the COVID inquiry, but he did say it was a mistake for his government to focus too heavily on preparations for a wave of influenza infections instead of other respiratory diseases. Here's our health editor, Hugh Pym.
Welcome them and to build...
David Cameron, while he was PM, he may have quit 3.5 years before COVID struck, but decisions made by his government on pandemic planning are under scrutiny, as he became the first senior politician to give evidence.
I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give shall...
Tackling flu was central to pandemic plans rather than any newer virus, and he acknowledged this was a mistake.
How do we make sure that you're not subject to groupthink, that you don't plan for one type of pandemic because it's very current, it's very risky, it's very dangerous? You need to have teams going in to question the assumptions.
Then came questions about health spending under the coalition while he was PM and whether that weakened the resilience of the NHS.
Do you accept, Mr Cameron, that the health budgets over the time of your government were inadequate and led to a depletion in its ability to provide an adequate service?
I don't accept that, neither on a sort of big picture level or on a small picture level. I mean, the big picture level, I don't think you can separate the decision and the necessity of getting the budget deficit down and having a reasonable debt to GDP ratio so you can cope with future crises.
Sue's father John died during the pandemic, but she wasn't allowed to visit him in hospital. She's been at the inquiry every day and says she was shocked by David Cameron's evidence.
They knew that these things were going to happen and they made so many recommendations, things needed to be done. And nobody did anything. It's shocking that he's not taking responsibility.
As Mr Cameron left, he was greeted by heckling. Tomorrow's witnesses include former Chancellor George Osborne. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
The driver of a tram that crashed in South London in 2016, killing 7 people, has been cleared of failing to take reasonable care at work. Alfred Doris was charged under the Health and Safety at Work Act over the derailment in Croydon, which left another 19 people seriously injured. There were 69 passengers on board the tram when it toppled at a sharp bend. The actress Angela Thorne, best known for starring in the BBC One sitcom To the Manor Born, has died. She was 84. Her most famous role was as Marjorie Frobisher opposite Penelope Keith from 1979 to 1981, as well as appearing in a string of long-running shows, including Midsummer Murders. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has been outlining his party's energy policies should it win the next election. They include a ban on new oil and gas exploration, much more reliance on green energy, including new onshore wind farms, and the setting up of a government-backed company, GB Energy, publicly owned and focusing on renewables. It'll be based in Scotland, and James Cook has more details now from Leith.
Everything about oil and gas is big. For half a century, the North Sea has made money by the barrel and pumped out vast quantities of greenhouse gases. But the peak in production has long passed, and Labour says the era of exploration must now end.
Our next Prime Minister, Keir Starmer.
Alongside the Scottish Labour leader, Sir Keir promised to ensure green infrastructure was built in Britain, benefiting British workers.
The moment for decisive action is now. If we wait until North Sea oil and gas runs out, the opportunities this change can bring for Scotland and your community will pass us by. And that would be a historic mistake.
Oil industry bosses and trade unions appear to be united in opposition to your plans, warning that they would chill investment and cost jobs. Doesn't that worry you?
When I look back at what happened with the coal mining communities, with the coalfields, and look at the mistakes that were made then, not planning for the future, not having the courage to see the change that was necessary, not leading your nation through that change, I am resolved that we will never repeat that under a Labour government. We will plan for that change.
The Conservatives agree that the UK must bring down emissions, but say Labour is abandoning the North Sea. There is now broad agreement that society needs to move away from this stuff, oil and gas, to renewable energy. But there is disagreement about the pace and scale of that transition. Some people worry that the UK is going to be left with a big gap between the amount of energy it produces and the amount it uses.
If we ban new oil and gas licences, that will create the very cliff edge we will want to avoid. If we ban new oil and gas licences, that means that we'll undermine the 200,000 people who work in the sector. If we ban new oil and gas licences, that will undermine our energy security while war is raging in Ukraine.
So will this policy cost jobs?
In the short term, it is clear if we choose to undermine the oil and gas sector, yes, it will cost jobs.
But environmentalists want Labour to go further and revoke any new exploration licences granted between now and the election.
It is disappointing that he hasn't been firmer on new projects such as Rosebank and Cambo. Climate science is crystal clear that there's no space for any new fossil fuel infrastructure, and that means that any new projects in the North Sea cannot be allowed to go ahead.
Labour does want to make it easier for wind farms, like this one near Glasgow, to go ahead in England too. But that's also controversial. Change on this scale is not easy. James Cook, BBC News.
It's day 4 of the first Ashes test between England and Australia, and despite a good start, England were bowled out before tea. It means the visitors need 281 runs to win, and Patrick Geary has the very latest from Edgbaston.
Monday morning, either an opportunity or a chore. Sunday's rain cleared to leave a test poised perfectly, or precariously. It depends on your view. England always look on the bright side. Pressure won't change that, just watch Joe Root. This team are flipping the conventions of Test cricket, one shot at a time. Root excelled, supported by first Ollie Pope and then Harry Brook, propelling England's lead above 130. But Australians rarely lose confidence. After all, it just takes one ball. Root fooled, stumped Alex Carey off Nathan Lyon for 46. A big wicket, England's 4th wicket. Before lunch, they lost their 5th. Brook gone, again to Lyon. Time for leadership. Captain Ben Stokes guided his side further ahead. England's picture improving with every run. But the Australian bowlers continued to scramble things. When Stokes was out, they were back in it. The Ashes sets up battles within battles. Ollie Robinson versus Australia is an ongoing debate, but England's concern was runs, not words. Robinson and friends helped lift their lead up to 280 when they were all out just before tea. So, how are your nerves? The last innings, Australia's innings. England desperate for an early chance. There it was. There it went. Usman Khawaja escaped into the gap. Meanwhile, every run Australia was scoring took them closer to that target, making England shift uneasily on the fourth evening of an enthralling test. They need a breakthrough. Now, it took them a while, but England have taken 2 big wickets since then. David Warner and Marnus Labuschagne, the men, out. We can play later this evening to make up for time lost to rain earlier in the match. A chance of rain again on the final day. So what happens this evening is absolutely pivotal. Australia 78 for 2 now, chasing 281 for victory.
Interesting, Patrick Geary. Thanks, Patrick. Right, he was suggesting there's going to be weather, bad weather, coming up. I hope not.
There's a chance again, Clive. I know. Weatherman comes to ruin things, doesn't he? Always. Yes, maybe 1 or 2 of these through tomorrow, but this was from this afternoon in Blackburn. Still 1 or 2 showers in northern England. They are now fading, but the storms are continuing in Northern Ireland and Scotland at the moment. You can see them here on the latest radar picture. Some more persistent rain in northern Scotland. That all fades tonight, and then we turn our attention further south towards the Bay of Biscay. What has been blossoming into life here is yet more storm clouds, and look at the direction. They're heading their way northwards. So that's to come later tonight. For most, well, the showers and storms in the north will fade. Most will be dry, turning more humid across southern areas. And beyond midnight, we start to see that heavy thundery rain. Channel Islands, parts of southern, particularly southwest England and Wales, push its way in. Now, most of you will start dry tomorrow from northern England northwards. But for the morning rush hour, potential for that heavy and thundery rain. Now, rainfall amounts will vary quite markedly. Again, we saw that this week. Some will see some torrential downpours and some thunderstorms. Others across parts of central southern England and Wales, very little at all. So this is where it ends of the rush hour. Through the morning, that pushes then into northern England. Parts of southeast Scotland too. Rest of Scotland, Northern Ireland, some slow-moving showers and thunderstorms have developed. And while skies will brighten further south, there could be a few isolated thunderstorms, including pushing across the Birmingham area and, of course, Queens down in London for tennis. Temperatures 19 to 24 degrees, warm in the sunshine. As we go through, though, into Wednesday, layer of low pressure still close by to the north, but shifting wind direction, coming in from a westerly direction. A straightforward mixture of sunshine and showers. Those closer to the low pressure, northern half of the UK, showers a little bit more frequent. The odd heavy and thundery one. Further south, very few showers. A bit of a fresh breeze. If you do see a shower, should push through reasonably quickly, but warm in the sunshine. And we could see even more warmth towards the end of the week, but maybe not particularly dry. Clive.
All right. OK, Matt. Thank you. Matt Taylor there. That's it. So, goodbye from me. Now on BBC One, let's join our news teams where you are. Bye for now.
You're watching BBC London. Coming up on the programme. Families of the victims of the Croydon tram crash say the systems let them down after the speeding driver is cleared of being responsible for the fatal derailment.
Very, very disappointing because the only one who knows what happened, the truth, is Mr. Doris. No winners at all involved in all this.
I'm truly and deeply sorry. It's something that I am going to have to live with for the rest of my life.
Also on BBC London this evening. Private policing is booming in London amid a rise in retail crime. Firms tell us why they're now paying for protection. After Boris Johnson steps down in Uxbridge and South Ruislip, we look at who could take his place as MP. And
it's one of the most famous race courses in the world. I'm behind the scenes at Royal Ascot. Find out more later in the programme.
Good evening, I'm Asad Ahmed. The driver of a tram that crashed in Croydon, killing 7 people, has walked free from court. Alfred Doris was driving the tram at more than 3 times the speed limit when it toppled over. He faced the charge of failing to take reasonable care at work, but was found today not guilty. Survivors and families of those killed in the accident say they feel the system has let them down. Our transport correspondent Tom Edwards has followed developments since the day of the crash in November 2016.
An everyday commute that ended in horror, Tram 2551 overturned on this sharp corner on a dark morning going into Sandilands tram station in South London. The driver was Alfred Doris, seen here in the middle. He was today acquitted of failing to take reasonable care of his passengers. Outside court, the families of those who died were despondent.
Just tell us, what's your reaction to the verdict?
Speechless, gobsmacked really. 12 people have found him not guilty, but I know there's going to be a hell of a lot of people out there that still think he's guilty.
Do you think the process has let you down?
I think so. I think there's certain elements. For example, he'd done the journey several thousand times, and this day he said he had a bad day, but 7 people had a worse day.
Whoever was responsible for it is beside the point now, and it's been proved the other way, so...
These 7 Londoners died in the crash on November the 9th, 2016. 61 passengers were injured, 19 seriously. Throughout the trial, Alfred Doris, the driver, denied that he had fallen asleep at the controls. He said he'd become confused and disorientated, but had never fallen asleep. He drove the tram into this corner at over 70 kilometres an hour, a long way above the speed limit. As it turned, passengers described how they were thrown around like being in a washing machine. The court heard how after the crash the driver suffered post-traumatic stress and he had separated from his family. His defence was, in the tunnel approaching the corner, there was a lack of visual cues, poor signage, and many of the lights were broken. He became disorientated and thought he was going in the opposite direction. Outside court, his solicitor spoke on his behalf.
I'm sorry that some of you have lost someone, some of you had had life-changing injuries, and all of you have suffered and endured the mental trauma since the accident. I'm truly and deeply sorry. It's something that I am going to have to live with for the rest of my life, and I would just like to end by saying there are no winners in this case. And that's it, thanks.
Mr. Doris, any messages to the families?
No.
The court also heard that Transport for London and the operator allowed a safety blind spot to develop. No risk assessment for a high-speed derailment was ever carried out at this corner. Measures were never put in place to mitigate that risk. The court heard they created at Sandilands an accident waiting to happen. There are still many questions. Was fatigue dealt with properly? Why weren't previous incidents investigated? There was a near miss on the same corner reported by a passenger just 10 days before. At the time Michael Liebreich was on the TfL board, he says the problem was systematic. And so far there hasn't been scrutiny of fatigue management.
This was culture. This was an accident that could have happened to any of the drivers on the Croydon tram at the time. There's a wealth of information that has emerged since that shows long-standing issues around particularly fatigue, but also working conditions. I think the fatigue is at the core. On top of that, there were cultural issues around reporting, around drivers worrying about being disciplined for reporting that they felt tired.
Matthew Parnell was on the tram when it turned over. He has tried to move on, but it's been difficult.
All I remember is I was reading a magazine, I was on my way to work, and I remember going through the tunnel. It was early in the morning, it was dark and it was raining, and all I remember is thinking he was going a bit quick through the tunnel, and didn't think no more of it, carried on reading the magazine. And then I woke up in St George's Hospital in Tooting about 4 hours later, and not knowing what had gone on, just woke up in hospital wondering why I'm here. So, and that's all I remember of it, really, sort of, you know.
How's it been the last 6 years?
Well, I mean, I was a HGV driver. Because of my head injury, they took my licence away. I've got it back now, sort of thing. And but it's been a bit of a struggle.
Since the crash, there have been many changes on the trams. There are speed limiters and driver awareness is automatically monitored. TfL and the operator have pleaded guilty to the health and safety offences. They'll be sentenced at the end of July. There are, though, still many unanswered questions. Tom Edwards, BBC London.
And you can read more from Tom on the Croydon tram crash on the BBC London website at the usual address. A number of businesses have told BBC London that they're paying for protection to protect them from shoplifters, because the Metropolitan Police often don't turn up to investigate. So security firms are stepping in to offer a form of private policing where they can even use handcuffs on suspects. Well, an area of Clapham Junction is the latest to take matters into their own hands, and our Home Affairs correspondent Sonia Jessup has been to see how it works.
Patrolling their local beat. But Vitor and Nate here are clearly not Met police officers. They're private bobbies, paid for by businesses in Clapham Junction who are worried about shoplifting.
Hello, how's it going?
It's obviously scary. It's not nice for a business, especially recovering post-COVID. You normally find it's usually a few people coming in at the same time, somebody trying to make a little bit of a hustle, bustle, distraction.
She shows us the WhatsApp group where stores now report shoplifting. Many claim when they have called police, they don't always respond.
I understand that there probably are bigger crimes happening elsewhere and the Met is stretched, etc. However, yeah, I mean, you would like to have some sort of a response, have somebody held accountable.
It's why the Business Improvement District here, representing around 400 firms, decided to pay for private patrols.
Before the pandemic, we had regular policemen who were always the same people. You know, you spot them, and they were regularly around the area. Post-pandemic, they literally disappeared overnight.
There's a general awareness now that the police don't exist in the public domain in the resources that they used to. I think there's also an awareness that the police are very much tied up with increasing bureaucracy.
The Met Police says it's not a new development for businesses to employ private security firms, and it works closely with them.
Across London, shoplifting has risen by 21% in the last year, though some people believe that figure could be far higher because not all offences are being reported. But is paying for a service traditionally provided by the police a good idea?
It does bring up a lot of questions between, private and public security, and I imagine that might also be scary for some people.
I guess it's a worry in that, that if we don't think the police that, our taxes fund that can cope with something that shouldn't be a major issue.
I think it depends on the individuals they recruit. I think certain individuals need to be vetted when it comes to positions of authority, and if you are not careful enough and you are not